So on the previous tutorials in this playlist, you may have noticed that from the asset package that I downloaded when we were ready to do the background, just grabbed it from the folder and drug it in, and then we had a game object in there ready to work with the whole background was already assembled. But this is not always the case. A more efficient way to do backgrounds, so something that is often in asset packages, is Tilesets. So let's go over working with Tilesets real quick in case the assets that you find, the images you like, come in that form rather than an assembled form. So like before, we'll go to the asset store. I'll go ahead and maximize this. And this time I did find a couple already. You can dig through and just find the assets you find some assets you like. And I'm going to download two here, two packages just to address some things. So I found this forest one, this tiny RPG forest. This has some nice backgrounds. So I'll go ahead and import that to the package. Import that. And I also found this one of Tilesets for background of medieval pixel art asset. So I'll import that one as well. And I'll pause the video while these import. So now that those have been added to the project, you can go ahead and close the asset store here. Get that out of the way. And you'll notice here in assets, there are these two new folders, the medieval and the tiny RPG forest. So if we look in these folders, I'll go in this one here under artwork and environment. Here's the backgrounds we have to work with. If we drag it in, well, that doesn't look like the background in the previous tutorials where there was a nice complete room to work with. Here we have pieces of the background and we have to put it together. So that's what a tile set is. It can be far more efficient, and we're not stuck with the room that the artist created for us. We can put the pieces together and build the room we want. So let's look at how to work with tile sets. I'll delete that out of there. And I'm going to do most of the work with the other one. I brought this one in for a reason. So we want to kind of look at what we have. So if we notice there's two tile sets here. There's tile set and tile set sliced. You'll often see both of them in a package. So if we go to tile set, select that, and then over in the inspector, you'll see sprite editor. If we open the sprite editor, notice this is one big image. We can't click on a single thing here. So I'm going to close out of that and go to the sliced tile set and open that in the sprite editor. And now you'll see that each one of that is composed of lots of little pieces of the rooms that we can put together. So make sure, just open it in the sprite editor and make sure you have small tiles ready to work with. And if everything is set up correctly, we just need to paint those tiles onto our image. So to do that, we can come up to Window, and under 2D, you'll see this option for Tile Palette. If you select that, we have this little window that opens up. So I'm going to drag it around and dock it over here to kind of get it out of the way. I'm not sure what that one there is, but I'm going to create a new one. I guess it just remembered the previous one I was working with. I'm going to create a new one, and I will call this Forest. That's what that package was called. I don't see much green in there. I think of green with forest. That looks kind of brown, but that's what it was called, so I'll call it Forest. Then hit Create, and this will get our palette set up, but we need a place to keep it. So it'll open the Explorer, and you'll want to come up here and back to the top level of assets and create a new folder to keep all of these in. Let's call this one Forest. Then select that folder and it'll create the new one to work with. And notice there's no tiles down here. So then just grab the tile set and drag it over here and save it in that same folder. So we go back up to the assets folder in this forest folder that was just created, select that folder. And it'll import all the images. Or this is one big bitmap, so what it has to do is go through and split that up into lots of little bitmaps. So it does take a second. And after just a little bit of waiting, you'll see over here in the palette, all of those tiles have now been brought in so that we can work with them. And the tools we have up here, so we have a selection tool. The important one is going to be paint, the paint tool. So it's just like a brush. We'll just select a tile and drag our brush around to show where that goes on the screen. We also have a rectangle where we can select a huge area and it will just fill that whole area with the tile. Or once we have an enclosed shape, we can just use the paint can to fill it. And obviously an eraser. That's an important one as well. So I'm going to go to the brush, and in order to paint, we need a grid to paint on. So you come over to the hierarchy, and in the scene, right click, and 2D object, you want a tile map. And notice that the grid, it created a grid, and that can be expanded to a tile map. There's two parts to it. So we're painting on the tile map. So then all we do is just select one of our tiles down here, and we can drag our brush around to paint it. And here's the reason I brought in two packages instead of one, two asset packages instead of one. Notice the size is wrong. Our grid, selecting the grid over here, says it has a cell size of 1, and these pixels just don't fit. So this particular one had 16 by 16 pixels, but our grid by default is much bigger than that. So we want to make sure that your cell size matches the size of the pixels. I'll set it like that, zoom in, so yeah, down to 0.16 kind of fit in nicely on those. And notice they're tiles, so they line up next to each other. What I just select, so if I select another one over here, things should line up in certain orders with the tile sets, but I picked these small ones just to point at this. So make sure your grid is set to the correct cell size, and all you do is just grab the paintbrush and select the tile you want, drag it around to draw it on there, or you could fill an entire area with them all at once. It's kind of the options of what we had. So I'm going to delete this one and do another one with that other asset pack I downloaded. Oh, the other thing I wanted to show for comparison is notice that every one of these tiles is a perfect square. It fills up that whole square in the grid. So if we go back to the other one that I downloaded, the medieval one under, here's our tiles. Notice some of them don't take up quite a whole square. There's like some transparency between them. And if you want to work with that transparency, we just have to do it in a couple layers. So to go through those steps again, once we have our tile set downloaded, yeah, so this one's already kind of set up. When I downloaded this, it came in there. So instead of creating a new palette, it recognized that there was one already in there. And that's what all of this is. And notice there's some transparency on this one. That's one of the main things I wanted to look at. But once again, if not, just create a new tile palette and set a folder up to save it in and drag your tile set over, and the computer will go through and sort out all the tiles as they need to be painted on. So this was already included in the asset, and most of your asset packages are going to have the tiles included. But this one has some transparency, right? So this area here should have this little thing here filled in. So we want to do that in layers, because if we just tried to paint it, so I'll come up here in the hierarchy, create a new tile map. If we just tried to paint it on, so I'll grab this back part first. I'll grab all of those, go to the brush, and just click up there to paint it in there. Notice that in this one, it did fit the grid a little bit better. But still a little small. And this one includes transparency, so if we put that background in, and then came over here and tried to grab like the spot to fill it in with, well, there's a little problem with the transparency there, right? When we brought new tiles in, those clear corners erase the tiles beneath them. So what we have to do to work with that, I'll hit Control Z to undo that, is we need more than one tile map. So with the grid selected here, I'll click right on it and create a new tile map. So that way there's two tile maps. And in the second tile map, I'll bring in these other components and paint them right there. And then each tile map on its own has some transparency. So if we have weird angles, we'll just need multiple tile maps to see which one's which. And that gets our background set up, but looks like it might not quite be the right size here. So to make it the right size, one thing we have to do is notice how it's still trying to paint everything. So whenever you're finished painting the images, make sure you come over here and close the palette. So now we get back to our normal tools, and then I'll select the grid. And remember, if your tiles are the wrong size, change the cell size here to fit the tiles, put the image together, and afterwards, after you close the palette, select the grid and change the scale. Maybe we actually wanted that like 5 times bigger. So we'll change the X and Y scale to 5, which makes that whole fit on the screen a whole lot bigger, because we can see the preview of our camera outline here. So then we can just select that and move it to the position we want. There we go. That looks like a good starting point. We'll start right in the middle, put a character on there. And personally, this is the background, so I like to set the background further away. So I'll set the background like 10 units back on the Z, with our main camera -10, so 10 units forward, 10 units towards us on the Z, and the background's like 10 units away. And then all our characters and platforms and anything like that can go in between the camera and the background. And finally here, we'd like our character to be able to interact with the background sometimes. In particular, it looks like this background was set up for a platform game, which means we'll have gravity pulling our character downward, so we'd like it to stand on this surface that appears to be a floor here. And we've seen how to do that in other tutorials. We can just set up the physics engine and it'll automatically detect a collision. And one object has to have a rigid body on it, and both objects in the collision have to have a collider. So typically we put the rigid body, all the laws of physics, onto our player object. So this floor here just needs a collider set to it. So we can go ahead and set that up. So select the grid. And while I'm over here, I'm going to go ahead and rename that. I'll call that background, just to help it stand at, help tell what it is, because we'll do a platform here in just a second as well. And then we need to add a collider. So over in the inspector, add component. Under physics 2D, There are a number of colliders. A box collider, that gives us a square box, but this isn't really a square shape. So our best two options would either be an edge collider or a polygon collider. I'm just going to use an edge collider. So select an edge collider. And when I hit the edit features for that, you'll kind of see this little line. So here's the edge. We can just set this up to detect one little edge. So I'll start over here and kind of zoom in and just drag some points on this around so that it matches the floor. And maybe the wall here. Match the floor and the wall and get it right where we want the character to stand. And just grab a few points and drag them around until you have the outline of the floor there. And the walls and maybe the ceiling, if you don't want your character to jump past it. But to keep this tutorial short, I'll just go ahead and do the floors and the walls. That way when the character falls down, gravity pulls it down, a collision will happen here and it'll just stop falling when it hits the floor. So all it was just an edge collider. And to go one step further, let's go ahead and add in a platform for the character to stand on, because this looks like a platform, and that'll be a quick review on all of this tile set that we've looked at. So once again, to work with our tile sets, we need to come to Window. Under 2D, we'll have Tile Palette, and this gives us all of our painting tools. So I'm going to dock this over here out of the way. And here in these tiles, it looks like we have these look like platforms for the character to stand on. So I'm going to select one of these grids, or one of these tiles, and create a new grid for it to go in. So I'll right click in the hierarchy, come down to 2D object, create a new tile map, and notice that created a new grid for us and put at least one tile map in there that we can paint on. So I'll rename this and call it platform. And now I'll just come up here and paint these tiles in. Whoops, undo that one. Make sure you select the right platform, the right tile map, and now come up here and paste a couple of these. So there's an edge one. Here's a middle one. I'll drag that along a little ways, and then the other edge of this platform. Whoops, didn't need that last one. So I'll go to the eraser and just click on that cell to erase it from there. So that gives us a little platform. It's a little small compared to the other ones. So I'm going to come in here and select the grid itself, which I already renamed as platform, and scale that up maybe 3 times as big. Nope, not the cell size though. See what happens when you scale up the cell size? Those images no longer fit. So adjust cell size of the grid to fit your tiles, and then adjust the scale of the grid to make the tiles and everything bigger. So select that, and then we can just move it into place wherever we want it. That looks like a good spot for it. And this one is a nice square shape, so for the collider on the platform, we can just go to Physics 2D and add a box collider. But notice it put it in a weird spot. So usually with tile sets, you do have to do some editing. So just kind of drag that box around until you get it to the right, surrounding the right image. About there, and then the bottom of it can go about there. There we go. And now when our character is above that, it will just kind of naturally fall onto the platform. And that's the basic idea of working with tile sets. Hopefully that'll get you started. And the other things like putting the player in there and making the player, like I said, gravity will pull it down to fall on the platform and then move left and right. There are other tutorials in this playlist covering that. I just wanted to do this one covering tile sets because most of the better asset packages will come in tiles. So you want to see how, you'll want to know how to do that. So after you download the tiles, just a quick review here at the end. Go to Window, 2D, and Tile Palette, which will open this one. And if there's not a palette already created, create a new palette, and you have to choose a folder to put that palette in, create a new folder to put that palette in, then drag your tile set over to that palette and make sure you save it in the same folder. And then all you do is just create a grid, grab your brush, select a tile, and drag your brush around to paint the tiles onto that grid to create your background. And then so that the character can interact with it, set up some colliders around that background. Most likely, the ones we did here, the edge colliders, and then you can just trace out the parts of the background where you want the collision to happen, where you want to keep the character refined. But that's basically all there is to working with tiles. Just set up the palette, grab the brush, drag it around to paint on the grid. And always remember to, after you're finished painting the background, to close the palette so that you get back to the normal tools for working with your scene.